Okay, so today we're going to continue our conversation about Ayurveda. So if you haven't checked out the Intro to Ayurveda video that I posted a couple weeks ago, go back onto the blog and check that out first so that you have a good foundation about what we're talking about. A lot of people don't know what Ayurveda is, and hopefully I've provided a good foundation and overview for you that's basic enough and easy enough to understand. So today we're going to talk about the doshas, and dosha is a Sanskrit term that really means constitution. That's a really great translation in English for dosha. And what I mean by constitution is, in a way, personality. But it's more than personality, it encompasses our entire being. It's who we are, it's how we act, and it's how we react to situations in our life. It's the tendencies for our body to be a certain way in specific situations that might be governed by things like weather, things like stress, things like grief, tragedy, any type of emotional situation. Based on what our constitution or our dosha is, we will react in a certain way. And we can start to notice this in our bodies when we understand how we are created and what we are created of. So let's talk about the doshas themselves. The doshas relate to elements. So let's look at the elements that we have in our surroundings, in our environment. There's 5 of them. And we've got fire, we've got water, we've got earth, we've got air, and then in Ayurveda and in much of alternative medicine, there's a 5th element which is called ether, and that's also known as space. The space around us, the space within our bodies. It's not just water next to fire, next to earth or matter. There's space there, and that is just as important as all the other elements. So the doshas, there are 3 of them, and we all have and are made up of all of these different elements, just like nature has all of these elements in them. But on some days, there are more of certain elements than others, and within us, we all have more of certain elements than others. So Vata is made up of ether and air, and Vata is V-A-T-A. It's one of the doshas, and people that have an abundance of air and ether within them means that typically their bodies will be a certain way. They will look a certain way. And with Vatas, they're very, very thin, often bony or wiry type body frames. And it can be very hard for them to gain a lot of weight. It can also be very hard for them to lose a lot of weight. They don't necessarily have a whole lot of muscle on their bodies, but they're always very thin, they're always moving. Think of wind. Wind is the element in nature where we see air. Wind is always moving, and sometimes it can be moving so fast that it doesn't even have a purpose, a reason, an intention. And this happens with Vatas. Vatas can kind of go off and have a hard time staying grounded, have a hard time staying down to earth. And it's really easy to describe Vata in its highest form, so you might hear some people say high Vata. People with high Vata constitutions tend to be the people who really kind of live to the beat of their own drum. They do things their own way. They don't really necessarily, not that they don't listen to other people, but they live in their head. They just have this way about living within them, inside them, and other people might think that they're crazy, nuts, not responsible, maybe not always on time, but they're very, very creative people. And sometimes you can think of the term airhead, right? So we actually have terms in our language that pretty realistically describe these people. So airhead is a Vata term, meaning that they have a hard time remembering things. Again, they have a hard time staying grounded. Now, it's important to note that there is no good or bad here. This is just the way it is. And when Vatas are in balance, which means that There's no excess Vata, there's no decrease in Vata, there's just enough Vata in the body to help people feel really balanced and really good. They're extremely creative, powerful people, and they can make a lot of change in the world. They're profound, and they're very good at what they do. So again, being Vata is not a bad thing. However, once you know that you do have a lot of Vata in you, you can take preventative measures or precautions in your life to make sure that you don't get to that point where you feel like you're running around with your head cut off, where you feel like you're getting really airheady or whatever it is. You can invite grounding practices into your life so that you can stay grounded, as a reminder to yourself to not go up way too high with your Vata. And there are things in nature and in our surroundings that will increase our Vata and things that will decrease it. So increase in Ayurveda typically means aggravate. So Vatas don't like really cold, windy weather, right? Because Vatas are a lot of air and space, and so when there's a lot of air and space in the environment, that's increasing what we already have, which is actually aggravating us. So we want to find opposites almost to help calm us down. And with Vata, lots of wind, cold, windy days doesn't feel so good for people that have a lot of Vata. So things that you could do are wear a scarf, make sure that your neck is covered, make sure you've got a hat, and perhaps avoid going outside for the day, right? Or if you do have to go outside, really bundle up, take extra layers, and make sure your neck, your head, your feet are properly covered. So things like that. Vata's skin is very dry, so make sure that in the winter time, which is the fall and the winter of Vata season, that you're putting on extra moisture, perhaps using a humidifier, doing neti pots, or using a lot of oils to help keep everything really moisturized. So these are just some examples, and we'll move on to the next constitution from here. The next one is Pitta, spelled P-I-T-T-A, and the elements that make up Pitta are fire and water. Now, Pittas are very, very driven, passionate people, and their fire really burns brightly. The fire in our bodies is in our digestive tract, in our stomach, because that's the fire, the energy that we're using to metabolize and process and digest our food. So Pittas don't necessarily have much of a problem digesting a whole lot of food, but oftentimes their fire can burn too high, causing excess acidity in the body, which means that common ailments that people with a lot of Pitta, common ailments that they encounter or include ulcers and acid reflux and a lot of heartburn, because their fire is just too much and the digestive system can't take that. Pittas also typically can suffer from acne or really red skin. People with red hair typically have some Pitta in them, often a lot of it. The skin is fair. The build of a Pitta is moderate. There might be a little bit of muscle tone, but still not super heavy, not super thin, just kind of a middle ground boned structure. Pittas don't like really, really hot weather because, again, there's that excess of what is already there, which is fire in the body, and so that can aggravate Pittas even more. Pittas are really prone to get into temper tantrums or to throw temper tantrums. They can be very angry people, and again, this is when Pitta is going out of balance. So when put into a really stressful situation, when there's not time to balance things out, the first thing that a Pitta might do is start to get angry. A Vata is going to get anxious and worry. And so as I talk about these, you might start to notice things in your own life that sound really applicable to you. And that's kind of the fun thing about Ayurveda and the doshas. When you're first exploring and seeing what these different constitutions are, you probably will see some of these qualities in yourself. You might also find that you feel qualities to be true of multiple doshas or constitutions, and that's perfectly normal. Because as I mentioned before, everyone has all of these elements in their body. Some of us have higher levels of others. So for me personally, I've got a lot of Pitta in me. I have very high Pitta, very fiery, very driven, very motivated, but I also have a pretty high amount of Vata. So I have to be careful of both Vata imbalances and Pitta imbalances, which means in the summertime I'm going to work to cool myself down because the heat is going to aggravate me, and in the fall and the winter, the dryness, the coolness of the air, that's going to aggravate me as well. So I oftentimes need to take preventative measures in both of those seasons. Now, we can always take preventative measures throughout the entire year, but it's the seasons that the doshas correspond to specifically that we really need to look out for to help us maintain vital health and balance in our bodies. And it's in these seasons when it's most likely that our doshas are going to kind of go out of whack, because there's so much in the environment around us that we're experiencing that relates directly to our dosha. So the final dosha is Kapha, and Kapha is earth and water. And so Kaphas are typically, they tend to be people who struggle with weight issues. They can have a tendency to move into obesity. Not all of them, because in balance, Kaphas are very, very strong. Think of a mountain. This is earth. This is matter. These are very strong people. They have high endurance, and Kaphas make amazing endurance athletes, strength athletes in general, because they have this stamina, this steadiness about them that relates really well to being an athlete and to doing the things that athletes need to do to be successful. So in balance, Kaphas are so strong, and they're the rocks, right? Have you ever heard people say, you need a shoulder to cry on, or you're the rock in my life? These are the people that can hold steady and strong, and they're really stable when things go out of whack. They don't panic. They know exactly what they need to do. They have tons of compassion and love for others. They're really, really strong beings. But again, on that imbalance side, they tend to struggle with things like getting up in the morning, right? It's hard for them to get going, because if you think of the combination of earth and water, you have mud. And so mud is hard and it's thick to move through. And so Kaphas sometimes are a little on the slower side, where you've got Vatas and Pittas, which are just moving forward constantly. Kaphas are a little slower on the uptake, and again, that's not a bad thing, but sometimes they just need time, which means typically they're not morning people, right? So it's going to take them a little bit of time to get out of bed. And they might want to sleep in until noon or 1 o'clock. I'm a Pitta Vata. I've never been the type of person that can sleep past 9 o'clock a.m. and after that, my day is just done. And so the Kaphas are the ones that are sleeping until 1, 2 o'clock, and this is completely normal for them. Kaphas can skip meals. Their digestive power isn't super strong like a Pitta, which can just keep digesting and metabolizing because there's a lot of fire there. Kaphas have a little bit more trouble with digestion, and again, they're working on a slower time schedule, so they can skip meals really easily and not be affected by it. Vatas can skip meals, but it's not necessarily because they are consciously choosing. It's that their minds are racing so much that they actually literally forget to eat. And Pittas don't do well skipping meals at all. When they get hungry, they get angry, which some people call hangry. So Kaphas, they're, like I mentioned, a little bit slower sometimes, digestion's a little bit slower, and their tendency is towards sloth and obesity. So if they aren't able to get up and move, what tends to happen is they sit on the couch and they eat. They're very emotional eaters. And so this moves towards obesity. And the hardest thing for Kaphas to do is to move, but it's also the best thing for them. The hardest thing for Pittas to do is to calm down or cool down, and it's the best for them. And the hardest thing for Vatas to do is to slow down and be still, and it's the best thing for them. So there's so much that I can say about the doshas, but I hope that I've given you a good little brief overview. It's certainly not exhaustive. There's so much more to say about it. But again, this is kind of an introduction just to help you feel things out and introduce you to Ayurveda, to give you a good foundation so that the more that I write about it, the more you can know about it, the more you can be familiar with it and understand what I'm saying, and the more we can dive into it deeper together. So what I want you to do now is go to some of the links that I've provided below and take a dosha quiz. There are plenty of websites that offer really comprehensive quizzes that you can take online to help you figure out what your dosha dosha is. And this is the really fun part, because now you're starting to understand a little bit more about who you are. And once you understand which dosha dominates in your life, you have all the knowledge in the world that you need once you start understanding how the doshas work to find and create a balancing practice in your life that's going to uniquely suit you and help you balance, because you'll know what elements you need to increase, what elements you need to decrease, what types of activities are good, what types of activities aren't so good, what types of food can really be good for you, what types of seasons you need to be looking out for, all of these things that are just at the tip of your fingertips when you know a little bit more about you. So go ahead, pick one of the links below, or try them all and see if you get different answers, because all the quizzes are formulated slightly differently. And in the comments below, come back and tell me what your dosha is. I would love to hear from you. And also let me know if it resonates, if it rings true with you, or if there's something about it that just doesn't feel right. If you have questions, you know where to find me. Ask them in the comments below, and I look forward to increasing your knowledge about Ayurveda and working with you again soon. I'm not quite sure what we're going to talk about next time, but as questions come up from you guys, that will help guide me in the right direction. So I will see you soon. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this video, and good luck on your dosha quizzes. Namaste.